The night had a weight to it, thick and unyielding, like the air itself was holding its breath. I walked along the cracked pavement of my quiet street, each step swallowed by the heavy silence. The streetlights flickered, once, twice, then died, leaving me in a darkness so complete it felt almost wrong, as if my eyes were betraying me. A sound made me freeze, a soft scraping, like nails dragging across concrete, coming from the alley beside the abandoned house at the end of the street. My heart hammered and I told myself it was just the wind. But the scraping grew louder, deliberate, uneven, almost intelligent. I took a step closer. That's when I saw it. A figure, or something shaped like a figure, standing in the shadows, perfectly still. Its outline shimmered, wavering as though reality itself refused to hold it steady. And then, in a blink, it was gone. A whisper brushed past my ear, so cold it made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't have seen that." I spun around. The street was empty. The houses were silent. Only the darkness remained. But something had followed me. Something unseen. I couldn't tell if it was behind me, beside me, or inside me. And before I could catch my breath, the alleyway at the end of the street erupted in a sound that no human voice could make. A scream, hollow and echoing, reaching into the marrow of my bones. I ran. But I already knew, nothing could escape what I had just witnessed. I didn't stop running until I reached my front porch, chest heaving, fingers trembling as I fumbled with the lock. The key slid in, clicked, and for a moment, I imagined I was safe. Inside, behind walls I knew, surrounded by the mundane hum of life. But safety, I learned that night, was a lie. The living room was dim, shadows stretching across the furniture like dark fingers. The television was off, the silence oppressive. I told myself I had imagined it all. A trick of light and wind, maybe. The scraping, the figure, the whisper. All shadows my mind had conjured. But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. It had been real. Too real. I sank into the sofa, trying to calm the rapid thrum of my pulse. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, casting a cold glow, but there were no messages, no missed calls, nothing. Even the digital world seemed to avoid this moment, as if reality itself had withdrawn. Then came the first subtle sign, a soft tapping. Not at the window, not at the door, but from inside the house. My head snapped toward the hallway. The sound paused. My breath caught, then faint, deliberate, almost a whisper of movement. Something shifted in the darkness. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer, only silence. And then, the faintest sound of footsteps. Slow, careful, not quite matching my own heartbeat. I swallowed hard, telling myself it had to be the cat, or maybe the wind brushing through the vents. But my chest knew the truth before my mind could accept it. I wasn't alone. The next few hours were a blur of subtle terror. Doors I was certain I had locked were ajar when I returned to check. Objects I'd left on the kitchen counter were displaced, though there was no wind, no sign of entry. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision just long enough to catch attention, then vanish when I looked directly. Neighbors didn't help. When I tried to speak with old Mrs. Callahan across the street, her face tightened, eyes darting away. You shouldn't talk about it," she whispered, leaning close, her voice trembling. Things here. Once they know, they follow." I asked her what she meant, but she wouldn't. She only shook her head and retreated indoors. Even the familiar faces of my town had turned alien, their avoidance a quiet confirmation of what I feared most. I was alone in knowing. Alone in facing something impossible. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards became a footstep. Every gust of wind rattling the window was a voice. I began recording audio, taking photos, jotting down notes, desperate for proof, but nothing captured it. Nothing could. Every time I reviewed the evidence, the images were blurred. The audio nothing more than static. The notes smeared as if the ink feared to hold the truth. One night, driven by equal parts fear and compulsion, I returned to the alley. I thought maybe if I confronted it, maybe if I saw it again, I could make sense of what had happened. The street was silent, emptier than ever. And then I saw it, that impossible shape, shifting at the corner of my vision, fleeting yet unmistakable. It wasn't human, yet it mirrored me in some grotesque imitation. A whisper curled around my thoughts. "You're too late." Before I could react, it vanished. But the echo remained, resonating in my chest. a warning etched in bone. From that moment, I noticed subtle changes in myself. Shadows felt heavier, reflections seemed wrong, stretching a little too long, holding shapes that shouldn't exist. I began doubting my senses. Was I imagining it, or was reality itself bending? I couldn't trust anything. Not the walls, not the floor, not even my own mind. Then came the neighbors, rarely, cautiously, offering fragments of warnings, their eyes filled with a terror I had never seen. A man down the street muttered about things that disappear and return, watching you. A child spoke of voices that live behind the walls, telling secrets you shouldn't hear. Every story was fragmentary, incomplete, yet horrifyingly consistent. I began documenting everything obsessively. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper. Each entry was a step closer to understanding, or a step deeper into madness. I couldn't tell which. The impossible had entered my world, and with every observation, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. And yet, despite the fear, despite the solitude, a small, perverse curiosity took hold. I needed to see it again. I needed to know what it was, why it had appeared, and what it wanted from me. I didn't know then that curiosity was a dangerous companion, that my search for understanding would lead me into stories far older, darker, and more twisted than I could have imagined. That the impossible was only just beginning, because the figure I had glimpsed once, the one I couldn't describe, the one the world refused to acknowledge, was patient. It waited, it watched, and it would not leave me alone. The following days became a monotonous, suffocating routine, punctuated by moments of stark terror. I tried to carry on with life as if nothing had happened. Grocery runs, the occasional chat with a neighbor, mundane errands, all now felt unreal, like walking through a dream I couldn't wake from. Yet the figure, or whatever it was, lingered at the edge of perception, patient, waiting, impossible. It began with small, almost trivial signs. A book I had left open on the counter would be closed when I returned. A mug would vanish from the sink, only to reappear hours later in the hallway. I told myself these were forgetful mistakes, but then the shadows moved with intention, not just shifting, but curling around me, forming shapes I couldn't name. One evening, the light in my kitchen flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadow on the wall was not mine. It was taller, wider, and yet somehow humanoid. When the light stabilized, it was gone. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the sweat on my forehead was cold. I started keeping a journal, not for the hope of understanding, but for the sheer act of recording reality, in case my mind fractured completely. The entries began simply, noting strange noises or objects moving. Then came whispers, faint at first, barely audible, like someone murmuring behind a closed door. Sometimes the words were clear. "Leave," one hissed. Another, "You can't stop it." I could never tell if the voices were real or imagined, but their effect was visceral. The hairs on my arm stood on end, my stomach twisted into knots, and my heart seemed to skip in irregular rhythms. Neighbors avoided me now. Mrs. Callahan refused even to meet my gaze, shaking her head whenever I approached. One night I caught sight of her in the window across the street, standing silently, staring at me. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't speak. Only when I returned later did I realize she had left her curtains wide open. I began to suspect she had been watching me, observing something I couldn't see. Stories began to surface, fragments from others who had glimpsed the impossible. I met a man in a dark corner of the local diner who spoke softly, almost apologetically, as if the truth was too heavy to share. "They come when you're looking the wrong way," he said. His eyes darted to the ceiling. "Things that shouldn't exist. They linger. They follow. You see it once and it never lets go." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head. "It doesn't obey rules. Don't try to explain it. Don't try to fight it. All you can do is survive the knowing." I didn't want to believe him. Yet that night as I lay in bed, the ceiling seemed to pulse, stretching into shapes I couldn't comprehend. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards, and the shadow returned, silent, watching, impossible to describe. I felt it in my chest before I saw it, a presence that weighed down my ribcage, made breathing laborious. Sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed, eyes open, staring into the darkness, feeling the impossible's gaze shift along the walls. Each creak of the floor, each sigh of the wind, became amplified into a potential threat. I spoke aloud to reassure myself, a pathetic attempt at grounding. "I'm here. You're not real," I muttered into the empty room. The figure, no, the entity, responded in ways I couldn't comprehend. Objects would tremble on shelves. Shadows twisted against light sources. Once I caught it in a mirror, just a corner of the reflection, and it looked human, but wrong. Its eyes, I can't describe the eyes. They were like hollow voids, but brimming with intelligence, an awareness I could not survive. I turned away, heart racing, and when I looked back, the reflection was normal. Too normal. I began seeing signs outside my home, too. On the way to work, a lamppost would bend slightly, as if leaning toward me. Trees cast shadows that did not match the branches above. Occasionally, I saw glimpses of people who were not there, or people who moved in ways no living being should. I started avoiding the streets at night, but it didn't matter. The impossible didn't need darkness. It existed in the spaces between the silent folds of reality. One night, desperate for answers, I returned to the alley. I needed proof, something tangible. The corner was empty when I arrived, yet I felt it immediately, an oppressive presence behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Then a soft whisper, almost my own voice, said, "You're too late." I stumbled backward. The alley stretched impossibly long before me, twisting into angles that should have been geometrically impossible. A faint glow emanated from the far end, pulsing like a heartbeat. I wanted to run, but my legs betrayed me, rooted to the cracked pavement. The glow flared, and for a fleeting second I saw hundreds of eyes, impossible eyes, all staring at me. Then darkness swallowed it. I returned home, mind frayed, body exhausted. Sleep offered no escape. During the day, I started noticing objects I'd touched moments before appearing in different rooms. My car keys vanished, reappeared under the sofa. Notes I had written disappeared and returned with words added that I did not write. Even my sense of time became unreliable. Hours passed in seconds. Minutes stretched into unbearable eternities. Sometimes I would wake and have no idea if it was morning or midnight, whether I had been awake or dreaming. The impossible bled into everything. I questioned my sanity, but even madness could not account for what I saw. Then came the voices of others, brief encounters that added fragments to the puzzle. At the diner, a waitress whispered as she passed my table, "They come closer when you notice. Don't let them know you see them fully," a child at the park said, in an innocent but chilling tone. "They're behind the walls. They know what you're thinking." The more I learned, the more hopeless I felt. The impossible was not a one-time event. It was persistent, insidious, patient. I began locking doors, covering mirrors, sleeping with lights on, but nothing helped. It adapted, anticipated, lingered. I realized then the cruel truth. It didn't merely observe. It waited, it influenced, it learned. One evening, I returned from a grocery run to find the living room completely rearranged. Chairs stacked atop each other, books scattered, the television rotated to face a corner that had no wall. My journal lay open on the floor, the entries I had written that morning now replaced with words I did not remember writing. It knows. It is patient. You cannot escape the impossible. I wanted to destroy the journal, throw everything into the fireplace, escape into oblivion, but I couldn't. I needed proof. I needed understanding. And then the whispers began inside my own head. Not in the air, not in the walls, but inside me. Words I did not speak, thoughts I did not think, warnings I could not ignore. They see through you. You are not alone. It's closer than you think. By now, the line between reality and impossibility was gone. My reflection in the mirror no longer matched me. My shadow lagged behind, sometimes ahead, sometimes curling in ways my body could not. I began speaking aloud just to hear my own voice, desperate for the grounding of self. A neighbor appeared one night, Mr. Albright, an elderly man who had lived in the town his entire life. He looked at me with sorrowful eyes, as though I had been marked from the beginning. "It's inescapable," he said quietly. "It doesn't just appear, it chooses, and once chosen, it follows until the end. You've seen it fully now. There's no turning back." I asked him what it was. He shook his head. "No one knows. It's older than memory, older than the town. It exists, because we cannot see it until it wills us to. And then, it won't let go." I left his house with a cold certainty. The impossible had embedded itself in my life. Every street, every shadow, every whisper was a reminder. And I knew, as I lay in bed that night listening to the soft sighs and creaks of my house, that my confrontation with it was inevitable. The impossible was patient. and I was running out of time. The night arrived like a weight pressing down on my chest, thick and suffocating, turning every sound into a threat. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I barely moved, pacing my apartment like a caged animal, listening to the soft, deliberate creaks that no one else could hear. The impossible was patient, and now it was close, closer than ever. I knew it. I could feel it in my bones, a presence so intense it distorted the air around me. Shadows flickered across the walls, twisting, forming shapes that should not exist. Sometimes I swore I could see it in the corner of my vision. Impossibly humanoid, impossibly wrong. I turned, and it wasn't there. But the echo of it lingered, vibrating the walls, curling into my mind. It started with whispers, low and urgent, not in the air, but inside my skull. They hissed, taunted, insinuated thoughts I had never considered. I staggered to the mirror. My reflection did not match me. Its eyes were empty voids, its mouth curled in a smile I did not feel. I staggered back, heart hammering. Then the room shifted. The walls expanded, contracted. Time dilated. Seconds stretched into eternities. The impossible was not bound by physics or reason. It moved through the very fabric of reality, bending the world to its will. A scream echoed from the hallway. Not mine, not anyone I knew. I bolted toward the sound, crashing into the living room. The door at the end of the hall, which I had locked hours ago, now stood wide open. Darkness pooled from it like ink. I stepped in. The floorboards groaned, but the sound wasn't beneath my feet. It was everywhere. Above me, behind me, inside me. The air smelled wrong, metallic and damp, thick with the scent of something ancient. Then I saw it, not a figure, not a shadow. Something that shouldn't exist, shouldn't be named. A twisting mass of forms, stretching and writhing, folding in on itself, impossible edges tearing the room into fragments. Eyes blinked open on its surface, hundreds of them, staring into me, each gaze a blade of cold that cut into my sanity. I screamed. "You can't leave," it whispered. Not in the air, but in my mind. "It's inside you now." I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. Furniture shifted, impossibly heavy, as though reality itself resisted me. My hands trembled, reaching out to touch something solid, anything, but it slipped through my fingers like water. I realized then that nothing in this room, not the walls, not the floor, not even the air, was real in the sense I understood. I tried to run. The hallway stretched endlessly, twisting into shapes that could not exist. Doors led to other doors, each opening onto a corridor that should have been the same length, yet stretched farther than logic allowed. I screamed again, a sound swallowed by the impossible, echoed back to me in distorted laughter. "You see it?" It hissed. "You understand now." My mind fractured, unable to comprehend the shape, the enormity, the intelligence of it. It mirrored me in ways I could not define. At one point, I caught a glimpse in a cracked mirror. My body split in half, my shadow moving independently, my reflection staring at me with a hunger I could not bear. I fell to my knees. "Stop," I whispered, voice breaking. "Please, leave me alone." A single hand, or the suggestion of a hand, emerged from the darkness. Its touch was everywhere and nowhere at once, crawling along my skin, burning, freezing, twisting my senses. My vision blurred. Time ceased. Space became irrelevant. Then the voices, hundreds of them, layered, overlapping, all whispering, screaming, taunting. Each word was a shard of ice in my mind. "Why did you see us? You shouldn't have come back. You belong now." I screamed louder, but sound became meaningless. The impossible had no mouth, yet its presence devoured my voice, my thoughts, my memories. I clawed at the floor, at the walls, at my own body, trying to anchor myself to the world I once knew. And then I saw them. Faces, hundreds of them, pressed into the impossible, screaming silently. I recognized a few. Mrs. Callahan, the child from the park, the man from the diner, all trapped, all consumed, all witnesses of the impossible, just like me. "No," I roared, desperate, helpless. "I won't." The world shifted again. The room I thought I knew was gone. I was suspended in a void, nothing tangible around me, nothing solid to grasp. The impossible loomed, omniscient, patient, crushing me not with weight, but with inevitability. "You cannot fight it," it whispered, each syllable resonating in my very bones. "You were chosen the moment you saw. You cannot escape." I begged, I pleaded, but words had no meaning here. My body was irrelevant. My mind barely clung to sanity. And then, something unexpected, a flicker of instinct, a memory of light. I reached deep, clinging to the small, fragile part of myself that remembered warmth, sunlight, the ordinary. I focused, imagined a line, a thread connecting me to the world I had known. The impossible recoiled, almost imperceptibly, as though my insistence on reality caused it irritation. Shadows twisted violently, eyes blinking in confusion. But it was patient. It had endured longer than I could imagine, and a few moments of resistance would not stop it. I screamed one last time. The impossible leaned closer, its voice a final, cold whisper. You see now. You belong. Then, as quickly as it had enveloped me, the presence withdrew, leaving a void of silence so absolute it rang in my ears. I collapsed to the floor, trembling, gasping, tears streaming down my face. The room had returned to something resembling normality, but I knew it was a lie. My journal lay open. Pages were blank, except for a single line, written in my own handwriting, but in a style I did not recognize. It is patient. It waits, and it will return. I staggered to the mirror. My reflection stared back, unbroken, familiar. But in the corner of my vision, a shadow lingered. A flicker, a presence, watching, waiting. I realized then that confrontation had not ended anything. I had survived the impossible's attention, but only barely. It had allowed me to live, not out of mercy, but because the inevitable was still unfolding. I understood with bone-deep certainty that the impossible was eternal, patient, and relentless. I had glimpsed its nature, and it had glimpsed mine. And now I would carry that knowledge forever. There was no victory, no escape, only survival, and a growing dread that one day it would not allow me to survive. And as I sat there, trembling, the air thick around me, a whisper brushed past my ear, almost playful, almost knowing. We will meet again. The dawn was pale and weak, filtering through the blinds like a tentative apology from the world. I sat on the edge of my bed for hours, staring at the floor as if my body had betrayed me and left my mind behind. My chest still ached from the night's terror, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. Even breathing felt alien, the act of drawing in air a reminder that I had survived. Somehow, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The impossible, at least for now, had withdrawn. But absence, I learned, was not freedom. It was merely patience. Its presence lingered in every shadow, every crack in the wall, in the faint echo of sound that was not there. I had seen what could not exist, and nothing, no warmth, no sunlight, no human voice, could erase that knowledge. I moved through the day in a daze. Breakfast remained untouched. The television showed normal programming. The radio chirped the usual news, but everything felt staged, hollow, unreal. Each glance at my reflection in the mirror made my stomach twist. My eyes were the same, my face the same, but I could feel it inside me, something that no one else could see. Something that had followed me back from the alley, from the impossible. Neighbors watched me differently now. Not with suspicion, exactly, but with a quiet, respectful fear. Mrs. Callahan crossed the street without greeting. The child at the park avoided my gaze, whispering something I couldn't hear. Everyone carried fragments of understanding I could only guess at. Even though I was alive, it was clear I was no longer part of their ordinary world. I tried to write. The journal had become my anchor, but the words refused to stay. Sometimes my pen moved of its own accord, etching sentences I did not speak aloud, thoughts I did not consciously form. I realized then that the impossible had left its mark, subtle and insidious, threading through the edges of my mind. I could not explain it. I could not fight it. I could only endure. Days blurred into nights. I counted hours by the flickering of streetlights outside my window, by the rustle of leaves on the wind. And each night, I felt the impossible watching, waiting, not needing to act because I had already witnessed, already been chosen. Sleep was intermittent and shallow. Dreams became arenas for impossible events, landscapes that warped and twisted, familiar streets bending into angles that defied reason, faces that shouldn't exist watching from the corners. I woke more tired than when I fell asleep, more aware of what had followed me. Occasionally, fragments of memory from the alley, from the confrontation, returned in vivid flashes, the impossible eyes, the voices layered inside my skull, the twisted reflection in the mirror. Each memory was a sting, a reminder that I had touched something eternal, something patient, something that did not forget. The impossible did not forgive or tire. It merely waited. The apartment grew colder in ways that couldn't be explained. I wore layers of clothing even in summer, wrapped myself in blankets during the day. The shadows deepened unnaturally, stretching across walls even when sunlight should have driven them away. Sometimes I would glance at the corner of a room, and there would be a flicker, a movement just beyond comprehension, a shape that shifted before my eyes could define it. I stopped going outside. I stopped answering the phone. Even emails and texts went ignored. The world felt like a stage, and I was no longer an actor but a spectator, powerless to alter the plot. I walked through my apartment as though through a museum of dread, cataloging every impossible event, every whisper, every shadow. Each one was evidence, proof that I had glimpsed the impossible and that it had glimpsed me in return. I tried talking to people, rationalizing, asking for help. No one understood. I would describe shadows that moved against logic, voices that whispered inside my skull, reflections that mimicked me in impossible ways, and they would nod politely, smile awkwardly, and retreat. The impossible was invisible to all but those it chose. Isolation became absolute. Then came the nights when the impossible made its presence tangible again. Objects would shift in my apartment, lights flickering without cause. The air itself would vibrate, and sometimes I would feel a brush of something against my skin, cold, insistent, deliberate. A whisper, always a whisper, you cannot forget. Each encounter left me hollow, a little less myself. I could no longer fully trust my perception. Mirrors felt like traps. Doors felt like thresholds into alternate impossibilities. Time no longer flowed predictably. I began to write timestamps in my journal to anchor myself. But even those measurements betrayed me. Hours stretching into days, minutes collapsing into instants. I became a shadow of my former self, a man present yet absent, living yet already consumed. Friends and family tried to reach me at first, then slowly stopped. The world outside continued oblivious. And I understood in a way that cut deeper than fear. The impossible was not gone. It never left. It waited for me to falter, for a moment when curiosity or desperation or hope would allow it to step closer again. One evening, I sat by the window, staring out at the street. The sun had set hours ago, leaving a gray twilight that seemed unnaturally still. In the corner of my vision, a shadow moved, not fast, not threatening, just observing. I held my breath, frozen, and it paused, as if acknowledging me, waiting for me to see it fully. I whispered into the silence, almost to myself, "I know you're there." "I see you." The shadow shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and then froze. The air grew colder. I could feel it, impossibly close yet unseen. A final whisper brushed past my ear, barely audible. "We will meet again." And then nothing. Silence. The city hummed faintly outside. I was alone, yet I wasn't. I sank to the floor, shivering, the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. My apartment, my body, my mind, all were still intact, yet fractured, permanently marked. I realized with a cold clarity that the impossible had not only touched me, it had stayed, embedded itself in the marrow of my existence. From that day forward, I moved through life as though suspended in a fragile bubble of normalcy. I smiled, I spoke, I ate. People saw an ordinary person, one who had survived some private trauma perhaps. But I knew better. Every shadow in every corner, every reflection in every mirror, every whisper in every silence carried a reminder. The impossible existed. It had chosen me, and it would return even now, years later. I cannot walk down a dark street without sensing eyes that aren't there. Can't lie in bed without feeling a presence leaning over me. Can't glance at a mirror without seeing the faintest distortion that hints at the impossible lurking just behind the surface. I tell this story not to seek understanding. I tell it because I must. Because the impossible does not vanish when ignored. It lingers, patient, waiting, inevitable. And if you ever witness the impossible, know this. It sees you now. It knows you. And nothing, not time, not distance, not denial, can save you from its attention. Even in silence, it speaks, and one day it will step forward.